Okay, so let's try the same thing, but with a side view. That'll be the goal, is try to get as many views here so you can see the construction done from multiple angles. So head we first. I'll do my gesture. I'll do this a little bit quicker now. So head, cervical, thoracic, big stretch for this pose. Here's the lumbar, a big pinch there. Pelvis, hips and pelvis pulled back. And then weight-bearing leg here would be this front one, I think. So that would be where my gestural pathway wants to start. So knee, lower leg. Don't have my proportion chart in this one, so it's clear, it's obvious, not like a must. It's just something I would throw in or add if I'm feeling like I need a little work on that, or I could use a little bit of extra help or reminder in the process. And then here would be my supporting leg. So that comes back this way. I like this, and I'll exaggerate these to kind of create a long diagonal just to add a little bit more visual interest. It definitely does create a, like a departure from what we see in the pose, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then my arms are going up here, and then I'm running out of room. So maybe we'll just make like a big C curve up here like this for them. Some kind of design up there. So next, tilts, shapes. So this is kind of, profiles are weird, so I don't have a lot of that tilt. So what I would be thinking though is in 3D space, it's higher here and then lower here. That's at least my thought process, right? So that might be difficult to kind of think through. You don't have to try to draw it like that, but it's beneficial to me just to have an idea of, this coming forward. Now, how would I manage it in terms of the shapes tilts? Well, maybe just making an egg. Egg would be fine. Something like that. I don't really have much of that. I'm not going to employ or use the tilt like I did in the other ones, but I'm thinking this. And then rib cage this way. So its tilt will be going, really what I'm thinking about is not so much the weight side to side, but the counter angles between them, kind of forward and back. And that would just be a response to the spine. Next, we could do our stretch and pinch. So now we have a stretch in the front. So I'm going to make this an S curve and then bring that down and into the rib cage. And then the neck is lower in the front and higher in the back. Probably, I think I might also raise my head up a bit. So let's change. I think I was too conservative with this angle. So let's push that more. Which is another nice quality of this style of drawing or process is it's very easy to kind of go back in and make corrections where I haven't really committed to like a light source. I haven't invested time. We all know that we'll do weird things with drawing when our egos get involved, and I'm not just worrying about making a drawing. Now I'm also worried about salvaging the last 3 hours of rendering that I did on a foot. So this is going to be my C curve. And then I'm going to do that's my wrap and overlap. So how do I solve the problem of just transitioning the head into the rib cage through the neck? That's all that's at stake here. So let's make the rest of the rib cage shape. So it goes this way. I think it's just off profile. So that's what I'm thinking, even though I haven't kind of gotten to my landmark stage. Now this side is clearly pinching, so we could do a little C curve. In terms of anatomy, the reason that could be useful later is, like just think about anything that's like, let's say an arm here. If the arm is flexing, all the muscles that are creating or causing for that would be shorter, fatter, more peaked. Just take on the appearance of something that is C-like or a C curve. And then passive muscles would be longer, thinner, more S curves. longer curves. So an early thinking of it at this stage actually helps me prep for this stage. It solves a language that I can repeat at any soft tissue area or intersection. And so that's why I like it. So let's do the S curve here. So we have our rib cage coming out. I'm going to overlap a line and then kind of just loosely describe what's there with a long S. And you know, it's not like I'm writing, you know, an S. I'm loosely defining the relationship of this curve as to being S-like. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Again. And then how do these connect? Well, I'm going to make this wrap over. So that's and we're doing this wrapping across the pelvis. And then the same thing here. Maybe lift this stretch up and bring it over the pelvis. So that's step 1 and step 2 and step 3. Gesture, shapes, tilts, and then reconciling with the connection. So that means it's time for landmarks. So we could do our rib cage. So what we're doing here in the front, rib cage and pelvis, so of course it's going to be a little different from the back, just as a reminder here. So I'm going to use a symmetry. I'm looking for a symmetry line again. So I could do the same thing we did with the back, where I'm putting the landmarks on in a way that suggests a turn or a rotation, but also to help with the width, the depth, the height. So the ones I'm using from the front would be pit of the neck, sternum. Sternum ends at your 5th rib. From there you'd have your thoracic opening, and that can change depending on the angle for men and women. And then I'll end in the 10th rib. Belly button is a good kind of in-between landmark, even though it's not a bone, but it does preserve that area of symmetry. And then the pelvis, directly underneath the 10th rib, is your as-is points. Directly underneath the 10th rib if there's not a twist. And then I'll use the bottom of the pelvis, or the pubic symphysis. There's ligaments that attach these together, the as-is to the pubic symphysis, but I'll just kind of curve it out. So in some, or simple terms, the rib cage could be an egg with a Mercedes logo inside, and then the pelvis could just be like a smiley face. It's good enough. Like it doesn't need to be more than that, really. So how would I see that here? Barely, right? Those are almost on the line of the contour. Like if I see a pit of the neck, it would be here. The sternum is just barely visible between the raised chest on either side. That ends, and then you could see the protrusion there would be the 10th rib. So like we're gonna put one here, and then one here, and then that would help to build an understanding of why there's that word herniation of the contour, or projection off the contour. That's the rib cage ending there. And then let's say I'm just confused as to how to find these points. Well, if you are, you can just drop down, you know, from the 10th ribs. That's going to at least put you in the area. So maybe there, like that would be where my as-is point would be. And maybe that's good enough. And so that's the pelvis moving back. So that's a landmark. And then what we haven't talked about yet is, or we haven't put on top of the drawing, the clavicle. I use a straight for a clavicle. It's more of an S-curve. The bone has 3 directional changes, and each one corresponds to a muscle beginning or ending. I would just put like, you could think of it like handlebars on a bike, or a bow and arrow, something that can exist as a straight line to move with the direction of the arm in the front, the same way the scapula moved in the back. So if the arms are up like this, that clavicle could be really high. And then, so it would have that same quality of gestural relocation or movement depending on where the arm goes. So up and down, forward and back as well too. So that's, let's say, is high there. Here's the humerus, and then we can see the elbow. And don't worry about getting everything perfect. I think it's just a good idea to begin exploring with a simple language of, you know, triangle, sphere, to indicate for where these bones are. And then once you get comfortable seeing, then you can make a more concerted effort to study that area and really understand it. it's always a balance of like maintaining the practical with the theoretical. If you just know a thing but can't draw it, you know, it might not be that useful unless you want my job. But you have to always find ways to kind of create that language that allows you to see both or practice both. And then the hip would start 2/3 of the way down. So here's the great trochanter. I know on the other drawings I put it at the bottom of the pelvis. More accurate would be 2/3 of the way. Then here's the femur. Again, remember in the other one we put the side view, could be that sphere because we're seeing the outside of a cylinder that's going away. And then I stand that on a plateau. That would be the plateau of the tibia. That's the space that the femur rolls across. And then from here, we would have on the outside of the leg that narrow and weird fibula bone, which is not weight bearing. And then this leg, it's going to be pretty similar. So we could do our femur, tibia. There's that bone. No fibula on this side because I'm seeing the inside of the leg. There's the tibia, the ending for that bone. And again, right, I really stretch that one back. For gestural reasons. Like I always love getting long diagonals when I can through a pose. So sometimes I can't resist, like that one. Now it's simply just time to develop perspective. So hopefully perspective is becoming a little less scary because I have everything I need to develop it. The only thing that's a little bit challenging more is side views, profile views. So sometimes with profiles, I'm not going to be able to draw a width, a depth, and a height. So boxes won't always be good solutions. Let's try it. Let's see if we can get it to work here. So I could go across the 10th rib. Does that, I think that's being more generous with that plane that we would see here. So that would be a lot more than probably we have. There's nothing wrong with that. You could exaggerate it and that would give you a nice like perspective there. So let's just try that. But then I'll show you some alternatives. So we could do this. Remember, my goal from a front view would be the opposite of what we did for the back. It'd be to try to show under the rib cage, but that's not really going to work here because of the turn. So maybe in this one, what we do is just create something that's maybe more one-point perspective. So I have my height and my width, but instead of showing a top and a bottom, maybe I could just do something like this. So that could be a box, but it feels a little bit odd, just like a little bit distorted. So instead, what I prefer towards when doing profile is cylinders. Less descriptive, than a box. I don't have like the clear and concise plane change that usually I find to be really beneficial, but I'm still referencing the bottom area of the landmarks. And then instead of doing the box, because as it turns into profile, I just lose that plane. But I just don't see that top side or front back as clearly. So I'll kind of go to buckets or cylinder shapes. So it's just problem solving, right, with the perspective and how you want to present it for that view. So you could do this. I guess if we were to use a box for that one, it would just, and I'm not drawing it based on how I positioned my initial landmarks, I think it would have just had to have been thinner for that front, and then this would be the depth for the side, and then maybe we could have shown underneath like that. That might have worked. Here's just a little bit better drawing of that underside of the jaw. That would be how much of the face we see from the front. So that could be under the rib cage. So let's color this in just so you could see that underneath a little bit better. And then for the pelvis, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to do another bucket shape or cylinder. But that's going to be the top, and I'm going to show you underneath the bottom. But this is the only time I do perspectives like this. And then again, if you didn't, let's say you find the cylinders to be too generic in a way that are hard for you to understand form, then you could also use a one-point perspective box. So an alternative or supplemental form could be this going away. You could use that too. And then, you could experiment with what the advantages and disadvantages of both might be. I always prefer the boxes just because they're clearer and easier to work with, but they're not always like really actionable depending on the view. Let's do cylinders for the legs. So here's, this one is slightly going away. So that's my top. Here's 2 parallel lines. And then here's my bottom. Lower leg, let's do the same thing. That's a cylinder. Again, what you could have done here, or I'd say let's break it down into like levels of comfortability. If you're more on the beginner side, I think it's easier to keep simple volumes. If you're more advanced, the goal would be to get closer to the finish sooner, right? So the process of showing all the perspective here is to make the 3 points explicitly clear. Where's the front, side, back, or height, width, depth. Once you have more experience, then the goal is to show those while hiding them. So I'll always look for like an organic reference point that could stand in as a plane change. Like, for example, think about like the head, and we know that our heads have like a front and a side. So how could I show that without making it explicit with a box? Well, maybe you use an eyebrow, and one part of the eyebrow goes across the front, and then you hook it and it jumps to the side. That's an organic reference, a surface detail that's telling you about a plane change relative to the perspective. So it's showing the perspective and hiding it simultaneously, which I think is the goal. But in order to do that, I have to know where the planes are to start. And then that's what tonal mapping is too. You're hiding the surface transition with edge, which is timing that transition at the same time. So, that would be the far end, using a cylinder and then hiding it. Something in between might be like, being more invested in the form intersection of the leg to develop a more descriptive organic volume. So like, again, the lower leg would be a bowling pin, an egg with a cylinder stuck inside of it, or a box. And so that's more heavy lifting in terms of perspective difficulty. So this would be kind of somewhere in the middle. So you just need to place, and one thing is always just, it's hard to know where you stand and how to proceed at your own skill level with that in mind. But this might give you a metric, right? Like of where do you fall on that, right? On this way of showing and disguising perspective. Are you at the early stage of kind of just getting your bearings with drawing simple perspectives, which is by no means simple or easy? Or are you pretty well versed and looking for opportunities to kind of hide those plane changes so that your drawing resonates as being finished more quickly? There's no, I don't associate any value with either of those. They're just different stages. I think they all have, kind of beautiful aspects to them. This leg, so this cylinder goes away. Like here you can see I'm still kind of enjoying, indulging in, struggling with just the simple perspective part. Which if you haven't done it, let's say you've been doing this or this for a while, you try to come back to that, it's really hard. So that's the back leg going that way. And then maybe we could let's do another cylinder for the lower leg too. This feels to me a little bit more graceful. And then for the arms, so I know where my clavicle is. The scapula, of course, would be moving with that. So if you can kind of identify that harder rigid surface, that's what we've already studied on the back there. And then let's match some cylinders on top of this. So this comes out and up. See a little bit on top. And then this one just slightly changes and goes away. So I'm just going to shift that to go that direction. Let's scoot this up a bit. So when I do classes, this would be the first thing that we set up. And then after this, we'll do this same kind of emphasis, but on detailed parts. So how do we build up a whole head with this intensity of thought when it comes to just form and perspective build? And then how would we do a hand and break that down, or a foot, or a nose? And then this arm kind of goes away, and then this one comes back toward us. I think the hardest things to draw are ellipses. So that would be the thing where I would probably practice the most. But for cylinders, the most important part is that you just want to match whatever you have at the top to the same at the bottom. Okay, that one's done. Let's try some front views next.